I'll never forget the day that package arrived at my door. It was my birthday, 70 years old, the kind of milestone where you expect your family to gather around, share stories, maybe even bring a cake. Instead, all I got was a knock, a delivery man, and a single box with my son's name scribbled on top. I smiled, thinking maybe he had remembered after all. But when I opened it, my heart sank. It was just a bottle of whiskey, no card, no phone call, no happy birthday, Dad. Just liquor, like I was some drinking buddy he barely knew. I held that cold glass in my hands and felt my chest tighten. My son, the boy I raised alone after his mother passed, thought this was all I was worth. But what really stung was what I found out later. He didn't even buy it himself. No, he had sent it through his father-in-law's account, like I was some afterthought, some obligation he had to cross off a list. That moment, standing there with that bottle in my hand, I promised myself something. If my son thought I was nothing but a burden, then I'd show him, his wife, and especially his smug father-in-law, exactly what a forgotten old man could do. And when I handed that whiskey back to his FIL, it wasn't just a gift. It was the start of a storm they never saw coming. I wasn't born into comfort, and I certainly didn't live with much ease. My story has always been one of scraping by, of carrying weights heavier than I thought I could bear, and yet somehow surviving because of one reason: my son. When my wife died, I was 35, and my boy was only 9. I remember that night vividly. I had to sit him down on the old couch, his small legs dangling off the edge, and tell him his mother wasn't coming home. His face went blank, then twisted in confusion, then broke into sobs that shook his whole little body. I held him so tightly that night I thought I might crush him, but I whispered over and over, "I'm here, son. I'm not going anywhere." And I never did. Life didn't give me much time to grieve. I had to work double shifts at the factory just to cover rent and food. I'd wake up before dawn, pack his lunch, always making sure to cut his sandwiches into little triangles the way his mom used to, and then rush to the bus stop with him. My boots were worn out, my hands always blistered, but I made sure he had clean clothes for school. I used to patch his jeans with old fabric, because I couldn't afford new ones. And I'd joke, "These are limited edition, kiddo. No one else has them." He'd laugh. And that laughter was worth more than a paycheck. Every night after my shift, I'd come home exhausted, but I'd still sit at the table and help him with homework. Math was never my strong suit, but I'd stay up late, teaching myself formulas so I could explain them to him. Sometimes I'd nod off in the middle of a problem, and he'd nudge me awake, giggling. Those little moments, his smile when he got an answer right, the way he hugged me when I surprised him with a dollar store toy, they were the fuel that kept me going. There were nights I went hungry so he could eat seconds, times when the landlord came banging on the door and I had to swallow my pee. Ride and promise him payment next week. Christmas was always hard. I couldn't afford fancy presents, but I'd make wooden toys in the garage, little cars and planes. He used to run around the yard with them, shouting with joy like they were treasures. To him, they were. And to me, his joy was priceless. As he grew older, the sacrifices got bigger. He wanted to join the school trip to Washington, D.C., but the fee was steep. I sold my car, the one thing I had left from my younger years, my pride, and used the money for that trip. I walked to work after that, through rain and snow. But when he came back from D.C., beaming, telling me about the White House and the monuments, I knew it was worth every step. When college came around, I nearly broke. Tuition was more than I could ever manage. But I took out loans, cashed in my retirement savings, and even pawned my wedding ring. That ring had been the last piece of my wife I still carried, but I told myself she'd want this for him. She'd want him to have a future. Watching him walk across that stage with his diploma in hand, I cried so hard my shoulders shook. I thought, this is it. This is why I fought so hard. He's going to be okay now. But life after he graduated grew lonelier. The house was quieter without his footsteps, the kitchen colder without our shared dinners. I'd set the table for two sometimes out of habit, only to put the extra plate back in the cupboard. My friends were gone or busy, and my siblings had their own families. I poured everything I had into making sure my son wouldn't feel the emptiness I did. If he needed money, I sent it, even if it meant skipping my own medication. If he needed advice, I gave it, even if it was late at night and I had to wake up in 3 hours. I never wanted him to feel like he was alone in the world, because I knew how dark that loneliness could be. There were small joys that kept me going. The evenings when he'd call, even if it was just for 5 minutes. The photos he'd send me of him smiling with friends. The Father's Day card he once scribbled in college saying, "You're my hero, Dad." I kept that card taped to the fridge for years, its edges curling with time. Whenever things got too hard, I'd look at it and remind myself, this is why I keep fighting. Still, the weight of loneliness pressed on me harder with every passing year. The birthdays I spent alone, the holidays where my only company was the sound of the television. I'd make myself small meals, light a candle just to feel less empty, and pretend for a moment that the laughter of my family still echoed in the house. Sometimes I'd even set out 2 mugs of coffee, as though my wife might walk through the door and sit with me. She never did, of course, but the act made the silence feel less cruel. And through it all, one thing kept me standing: my son. I believed with every fiber of my being that he knew how much I had given, how much I had loved. I thought he carried my sacrifices in his heart the way I carried him in mine. I thought foolishly that when the world looked down on me as just another old man, he would look at me and see his father, his protector, his foundation. But I was wrong, because the day that whiskey arrived on my birthday, I realized the truth. Everything I had poured into him, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar scraped together, it meant nothing to him. It was a Tuesday morning when the package arrived, my birthday, 70 years on this earth, and I woke up to silence. No knock at the door from family, no phone call, no happy birthday, Dad. Just the sound of the mail truck outside. When I saw that box with my son's name on it, my chest tightened. Finally, I thought, he remembered. For a moment I felt like a child again, excited, desperate for a sign that I still mattered to someone. I tore the tape open, eager like a fool, only to stare down at a single bottle of whiskey. No card, no note, just glass and silence. At first, I told myself maybe the card was lost. Maybe he'd call later. I placed the bottle on the table, sat in my chair, and waited. The hours crawled by. Noon came. Nothing. Afternoon. Still nothing. By evening, my phone was so quiet it felt like it had died. Finally, I dialed him myself. When he picked up, his voice was distracted. "Yeah, Dad? What's up?" I forced a smile through the phone, my voice soft. "Son, did you forget what today is?" There was a pause, then a chuckle. "No, Dad, of course not. Didn't you get the package? That whiskey's good stuff. Richard picked it out for you." Richard, his father-in-law. My stomach turned. "Richard picked it out?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "Yeah," he said casually. "He knows his liquor. Figured you'd appreciate it." I swallowed hard. "Son, I don't care about whiskey. I thought maybe I'd hear your voice today. Maybe we'd talk." He sighed, like I was bothering him. "Dad, don't start. You should be grateful you even got anything. Richard didn't have to do that, you know." "Grateful? To Richard?" My chest burned. I whispered, "I didn't raise Richard. I raised you." He scoffed. "Come on, Dad. Don't make this a big deal. Richard's been more of a father to me these last few years than—" He cut himself off, but the damage was done. I froze. My ears rang. More of a father? The man who swooped in with money and arrogance? The man who mocked me behind closed doors? I stammered, "Son, do you hear yourself? After everything, after all I gave up for you." But he interrupted, sharp. "Dad, I don't want to argue. Just say thank you and enjoy the gift, okay? I'll talk to you later." And then, click, he hung up. I sat there, phone still to my ear, listening to the emptiness. My hands shook. My breath came shallow. First was the shock. I kept whispering to myself, "No, he didn't mean it. He's tired. He'll call back. He didn't mean it." But he didn't call back. He never did. Then came the sadness, heavy as a stone. Tears slid down my cheeks, and I didn't even notice at first. I stared at that bottle on the table, its golden liquid shimmering under the lamp, and it mocked me. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. A message that said, "You're not worth my time. You're not my priority. You're just an old man to be managed." I replayed every memory in my head. Walking him to school in the rain, selling my car so he could see Washington, D.C., pawning my wedding ring to pay for his tuition. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of pride, and all of it reduced to a bottle picked out by another man. Disbelief turned to anger, my fists clenched, my teeth ground together. I whispered into the empty room, "How dare you? How dare you throw me aside like trash?" My voice rose, raw, broken. "I gave you everything. Everything!" The worst part wasn't the gift itself. It was what it symbolized. That he no longer saw me as his father. That Richard had taken that place, bought with money and smug smiles. That my son, the boy I raised alone, the boy who once called me his hero, now saw me as nothing but an obligation. I sat in that chair until the clock struck midnight, the whiskey untouched, my face hot with shame and rage. And in that silence, I made myself a promise. I would not let this humiliation stand. My son may have forgotten who I am, but I would remind him. I would remind all of them. And I would start with Richard, that man who stole my son's respect. Because if they thought I was too old, too broken, too forgotten to fight back, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. That night, after the call ended, the silence in my house pressed down like a coffin lid. The phone lay on the table, its black screen reflecting my tired face. My son's voice still echoed in my ears. "Be grateful you even got anything." Those words cut deeper than any knife. I sat in my chair, staring at the whiskey bottle as if it were a snake coiled and ready to strike. For years, I had swallowed loneliness, convincing myself it was part of getting old. For years I told myself my sacrifices didn't need repayment, that a father's love was supposed to be selfless. But that night, my heart screamed back. Selfless doesn't mean invisible. Love doesn't mean disposable. At first I tried to fight the anger. I whispered into the darkness, "He didn't mean it. He's just tired. He's stressed." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying to myself. That whiskey wasn't chosen by my son. That message wasn't an accident. He had handed my worth over to another man and expected me to bow in gratitude. I thought about my wife, gone so young, how I promised her I'd raise our boy to be a good man. I remembered standing by her grave with a hand on my son's shoulder saying, "Don't worry, I'll give him everything." And I did. But now, years later, what was I to him? A shadow, a burden, a relic left in the corner while Richard, the wealthy, loud, smug Richard, wore the crown of fatherhood I had earned with blood and sweat. The grief came first. I wept quietly, the kind of tears that burn because they come from somewhere deep, somewhere raw. My chest ached, my hands trembled, and I whispered into the empty room, "What did I do wrong? Where did I lose him?" But as the hours passed, something inside me began to shift. My tears dried, leaving behind something heavier than sorrow, rage. I stared at that bottle again. Its glass gleamed under the dim light, the liquid inside catching fire with every flicker of the lamp. It wasn't a gift. It was a gravestone marking the death of the bond I thought I had with my son. My jaw tightened, my breathing slowed, and then, in that suffocating silence, I realized something. Grief was useless. Tears wouldn't change a thing. If I wanted to reclaim my dignity, if I wanted to show them that I wasn't some forgotten old man, I couldn't keep begging for scraps of love. I had to stand up. My mind replayed his words again. Richard's been more of a father to me. The insult burned hotter with every repetition. My knuckles turned white as I clenched my fists. More of a father, I muttered. Where was Richard when you were hungry? Where was he when you cried at night for your mother? Where was he when I bled my hands raw to keep you alive? Every memory of sacrifice flared in my head, walking miles in snow, pawning my wedding ring, going hungry so he could eat. And in that flood of memories, my grief hardened into something sharp. I leaned forward, my elbows digging into my knees, my eyes locked on that cursed bottle. Enough, I whispered. The word came out shaky at first, then louder. Enough. I rose to my feet, the floor creaking under me, and I felt taller than I had in years. I have been silent long enough. I have been humble long enough. I have been invisible long enough. My voice filled the room, bouncing off the walls. I didn't care if the neighbors heard. For the first time in decades, I felt fire in my veins. I thought of Richard's smug face, his booming laugh, his condescending hand on my son's shoulder. I thought of my son looking at me not as a father, but as a duty, something to be tolerated. My blood boiled. And in that moment, the decision was made. I wasn't going to beg for his love anymore. I wasn't going to sit quietly while another man stole my place. I wasn't going to let them laugh at me, dismiss me, or cast me aside like garbage. I picked up that bottle, heavy in my hands, and held it to my chest. If this is what you think I'm worth, I muttered, then I'll make sure it cost you everything. The grief was gone. The disbelief was gone. In their place stood a cold, steady resolve. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was a father betrayed, a man wronged, and I would not rest until I reclaimed the respect they tried to strip away. I walked to the window, staring out at the dark street, the whiskey clutched like a weapon. The night air pressed against the glass, cool and unforgiving. And I swore aloud, my voice steady as steel. You wanted me to thank Richard? Fine, I will. But my gratitude will be the end of him. By the time I'm done, my son, you will remember exactly who I am. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with the whiskey on the table and a pen in my hand. If pain is a blade, planning is the sharpening stone. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote one word on the first page. Reputation. Richard worshipped it, so I would make it his god and his grave. First, I made myself small. I called no one. I posted nothing. I became a quiet ghost in my own life. That's how you move when you're hunting, soft, patient, forgettable. I started with what I knew. Richard drinks. Not socially, compulsively. I needed proof without touching a single law. No violence, no threats. Just the truth, arranged like dominoes. I listed his habits: bars, parties, charity galas, golf club dinners. I underlined the places with cameras. I circled the ones with policies. Then I called an old friend, Eddie. We used to share a line at the factory. Now he works in corporate compliance, for a rival that watches Richard's company like a hawk. I didn't ask him for favors. I asked him about rules. He laughed sadly, said, "Executives can't be seen drinking at sanctioned events. Not a drop." I wrote it down. I didn't tell him why I asked. Next, I visited a bartender I knew, Maya. She's poured half the city their troubles and remembers who pays with trembling hands. "Richard?" I asked quietly. Her eyes hardened. "He doesn't tip. He lectures." I slid the bottle toward her, unopened, shining. "I need this to become a mirror," I said. "Not here," she replied, "but I know where it will." I told her nothing more. She told me just enough. Bought a small UV marker at the hardware store. Invisible ink. A careful X on the lower corner of the label. Another mark beneath the cork. If that bottle showed up in photos, I'd know it was that bottle. Not just any whiskey, the whiskey. The one my son gifted me through another man. I drafted a card, simple, deferential, targeted. To Richard, the connoisseur, a token of my respect, from the grateful old man. Words taste like sugar when you need them to. I knew Richard wouldn't resist the flavor. I rehearsed how I'd hand it to him. Not angry. Not proud. Humble. Let the hook sink before you tug the line. Then I mapped upcoming dates. His company's foundation gala. A board reception. A golf tournament with sponsors. All places where cameras are hungry and reputations get fat. I called my neighbor Theo, rideshare driver by night, dashcam always on. Park near the club on Friday, I said. Why? He asked. Because you'll see a man who loves to be seen, I answered. He didn't need more. I found an old contact, Lydia, a freelance photographer who once took portraits at our neighborhood fair. She now freelances at corporate events. I can get you a slot, she said, if you cover my day rate. I'll cover it, I told her. She never asked why. Old people carry secrets the way trees carry rings. I printed the company's public conduct policy from their website at the library. 3 pages. I highlighted the lines about alcohol at sponsored events. I folded the pages into my notebook like a prayer. Then I called my son. I kept my voice steady. Son, I want to thank Richard in person, man to man. He sounded pleased, almost smug. About time, Dad. Tell him I'll bring the whiskey. Perfect, he said. He'll love that. I cleaned my shoes. I wore the old jacket my wife used to like. When I walked into Richard's office, I made my shoulders small and my smile patient. Mr. Richard, I said, holding out the bottle and the card. His face gleamed like polished brass. He lifted it high, like a trophy. Now this, he boomed, is respect. I nodded. Inside, I wrote another word in my mind. Bait. I left without a trace of triumph. I shook his hand as if I adored him. I thanked him as if he fed me. The most dangerous blade is the one that looks like a compliment. Then I waited. Waiting is an art. If you rush, you ruin it. If you linger, you lose it. I let the weeks stretch like wire. On Monday, I placed 2 anonymous tips. One to the company hotline, one to a board member's assistant's public email. Not accusations, questions. Will executives be serving alcohol from personal gifts at Friday's gala? Asking due to policy lines 2.3 and 4.1. Questions scare. People more than accusations. They make them look for answers. I checked my notebook again. Reputation, rules, camera, witness, bottle. Each word was a step. Each step had a name attached to it. Maya messaged me 2 words. Gala confirmed. Theo texted. Schedule posted. I'll be outside. Lydia sent a thumbs up and a camera emoji. Eddie wrote, hearing chatter about a policy reminder going out. Good. Let them remind him. Pride hates reminders. I tucked the Father's Day card from years ago into my pocket, the one where my son wrote, "You're my hero, Dad." Not for luck, for focus. Revenge should never be drunk. It should be measured. I practiced my breathing. In for 4, out for 6. Not because I was nervous, because I wanted to feel every second of patience sharpening me. I did one last thing, small, almost silly. I wrote my wife's name on the inside cover of the notebook. I said out loud, "Help me keep my hands clean." Then I closed the cover and set the plan loose. What was I really planning? Nothing illegal, nothing cruel, just gravity, just the truth arranged where everyone could see it. I would not shove him. I would not shout. I would simply place the mirror in front of Richard at the one moment he could not look away. And when he leaned in to admire himself, he'd meet the bottle, the policy, the lens, and the crowd. By the time Friday came, I had moved only inches. But every inch was measured. Every ally was quiet. Every piece knew its place. I didn't need force. I needed timing, and when the clock struck, I would not blink. I closed my door, turned off the lights, and whispered the vow that hardened my spine. I will not be invisible. I will not be gentle with arrogance. I will make this bottle speak, and when it speaks, it will end him. I waited until the perfect moment, because revenge is not about rushing in with fists raised. It's about watching calmly as the walls close in. And when my son and his father-in-law finally believed they had won, when they thought I was just the old fool they could laugh at behind closed doors, that's when I struck. It started on a Saturday evening, the day my son had invited his in-laws over for dinner, and I arrived unannounced, carrying not one but 2 bottles of whiskey, both expensive, gleaming with golden liquid under the light, and I could see the smug grin spread across his Phil's face as if he had already claimed the crown of authority in my son's life. But what they didn't know was that these bottles weren't just drinks. They were keys to their undoing, because inside the packaging, taped carefully under the label, were crisp photocopies of financial documents, property transfers, debt payments, all signed by me, proof that everything they were bragging about and enjoying had come from my sacrifices. I placed the bottles on the table and said, "A gift from a father who still knows how to give." And when the Phil popped the cork, eager to flaunt his dominance, I smiled quietly, because that was the beginning. The guests clapped, laughed, and toasted, but then I raised my voice, calm, firm, steady, and I told a story, not a lie, but the truth of every year. I broke my back for this family. The cold winters where I worked double shifts just to put food on the table. The nights I walked home with torn boots so my son could have shoes. The birthdays I missed because I was out earning money to pay for his schooling. And as I spoke, my son squirmed in his seat. His wife tugged at his arm, and his Phil sneered, "Why bring up the past? He's a man now." But I kept talking, louder, sharper, each word slicing into the air. And then I revealed the papers, pulling them from under the whiskey label, spreading them on the table for everyone to see. The house deed, the business loan, the bills all stamped with my name, proof that I had carried them, all of them, even when they spat in my face. The room fell silent, except for the clinking of glasses, and my son whispered, "Dad, not here." But I didn't stop. I turned to his Phil and said, "You love whiskey so much. Take it. Take the bottles, take the gift, because everything you hold in your hands is soaked in my blood, my sweat, my sacrifice." His Phil's face turned pale, then red, then twisted with anger, and he shouted back, "You're pathetic, trying to buy respect with old stories." But just then, the second twist unfolded. I had invited 2 unexpected guests, my longtime friends, men who had worked alongside me in the factory, men who knew the truth of my struggles, and they walked in carrying photographs, letters, pay stubs, evidence of every sacrifice I had made, evidence that my son had hidden from his wife's family because he was ashamed of his poor old man. And suddenly, the laughter at that table froze into choking silence. I let them speak. Those friends of mine, their voices steady as they recounted the nights I gave away my own meals, the mornings I stitched torn jackets to send my boy to school warm, the way I saved every dollar so he could have the life I never did. And as they spoke, I saw the pride drain from my son's wife's face, saw the confusion build in her eyes, because the picture she had been fed, that her husband's family was grand and superior, was crumbling in real time, and the Phil's smirk cracked as the truth spread like wildfire around the table. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The final twist was waiting. I leaned in, almost whispering, and I said, "Do you want to know why I handed you that bottle of whiskey? Why I gave you the gift meant for me? Because it was never mine to enjoy. My son gave it to me out of duty, not love, out of shame, not respect. So I gave it to you, the man he truly worships, the man he chooses over his own father. And now, in front of everyone, I give you both the only thing you truly deserve, exposure." With that, I opened the small leather bag I had brought with me and scattered the last piece of my plan across the table, printed screenshots of messages between my son and his FIL, mocking me, laughing about how the old man's easy to fool and he'll be gone soon anyway. And the gasps that filled the room were like thunderclaps, each one striking my son harder than any hand ever could. He stammered, "Dad, it's not what it looks like." But his wife shoved the papers in his face, screaming, "You lied to me. You made me think your father was nothing, when he's the reason we have anything at all." The FIL tried to speak, tried to salvage his pride, but the damage was done. His power, his smugness, evaporated in an instant, and I stood tall, finally taller than him, not because of money, but because the truth had crowned me. I looked at them both, my voice like iron, and said, "You thought I was weak, disposable, a man to be mocked and forgotten. But tonight you drink not whiskey, you drink shame, bottled and served by your own hands." And then I turned my back on them, walking out with my friends by my side, their applause soft but proud. And as the door closed behind me, I knew they would never laugh again. Not at me, not at the man who had built their entire world, because my revenge was complete, not with fists, not with violence, but with truth, exposure, and the one thing they could never take back, their disgrace in the eyes of everyone who mattered. I remember the silence that followed after my revenge unfolded. It was not the silence of defeat, but of stunned realization in the eyes of those who had thought me powerless, and in that silence I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace washing slowly over the storm that had lived inside me for so long. But it wasn't simple joy or triumph. It was layered, heavy, bittersweet, because I knew deep down that to get here, I had to break ties with the very people I once built my whole life around. I sat alone that night in my chair, the same chair where I had rocked my son to sleep decades earlier, and I stared at the empty whiskey bottle, now just a hollow shell, a reminder of the insult that sparked everything, and I whispered to myself, "You finally remembered your worth." The next day, I walked past neighbors who had heard whispers of what happened, and instead of pity in their eyes, I saw respect, something I hadn't felt directed toward me in years. They nodded silently, as if saying, "You did what had to be done." And though that brought me comfort, there was also a pang of sadness. I had not wanted to become a man who needed revenge to be noticed by his own family, but that is what betrayal had carved me into. I cooked my simple meal that evening, sat at the table alone, and allowed myself to breathe freely. For once, my chest didn't feel so heavy with disappointment. I won't lie, there was still pain. There were still nights when I woke up and thought about the boy I raised, the son I loved beyond measure, who chose to hand me scraps while giving his in-laws gold. I thought about birthdays, where he used to make me cards with crayons, writing shaky letters that said, "Love you, Dad." And I wondered how those innocent words had turned into greed and disrespect. Sometimes tears would come, uninvited, but instead of drowning me, they cleansed me. They reminded me that I was human, that I was allowed to hurt, but also that I was strong enough to keep standing. After the revenge, my son tried reaching out. He called once, his voice tight with shame. "Dad, can we talk?" But I let it ring. Not because I hated him, but because I had given him decades of my time, my loyalty, my love. And now it was time to give myself silence. That was my gift, silence, boundaries, a final wall. And though it hurt to do it, it was also necessary, because forgiveness without change is nothing but another invitation to be broken again. In the days that followed, I found new routines. I walked longer in the mornings, nodding at strangers, who sometimes became friends. I joined a small group of older men at the park who played chess, and we talked about life, about how children can wound us in ways no enemy ever could. One of them, a widower, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Brother, sometimes the family we pour ourselves into isn't the family that carries us at the end. Sometimes we must carry ourselves." Those words stuck with me. I didn't become rich. I didn't become young again. But I became free from the chains of waiting for approval from those who never saw my sacrifices. My revenge had been carried out, yes, but the real victory was not in their downfall. It was in my rediscovery of self-worth. I started writing again, just little notes in a journal, reflections about the years gone by, and each word was like patching a hole in my own heart. And here is the truth. I want anyone listening to me now to carry with them. Never let your love blind you into believing you are disposable. Sacrifice is noble, but only when it's met with gratitude and respect. If it's not, then it turns into chains around your own neck. I loved my son with everything in me, and maybe a part of me always will, but I had to choose myself when he did not. The moral is simple. Though it took me a lifetime to learn, blood may make you related, but loyalty makes you family. And if loyalty is missing, you owe it to yourself to stand tall, even if it means standing alone. My revenge wasn't just about teaching them a lesson. It was about teaching myself that I am not invisible, that my sacrifices were not worthless, and that my dignity was mine to reclaim. And as I sit here now, older, wiser, sipping tea instead of whiskey, I realize that peace isn't given. It's taken back, piece by piece, the moment you stop begging others to see your worth and finally decide to see it yourself. That's the true ending to my story.